to The Truth in This Art, your source for conversations at the intersection of arts, culture, and community. I am your host, Rob Lee. I'm so happy to be here with you today. And this is part of my media partnership with Baltimore Magazine. Thank you for your continued support. Today, I am super excited to be in conversation with two guests. Together, they co-founded Sonic Lifeline, a platform providing musicians with unrestricted expression, and they created the Hemingway Room in Little Havana in the Key Highway area of Baltimore, which is an intimate jazz space that fosters deep connections between artists and audiences. Please welcome Eric Baldi and Nick Moreland. Welcome to the podcast.
Rob, thanks for having us. We're really thrilled at the opportunity, and thanks for reaching out to us.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. We appreciate you taking an interest in what we've been doing in the music scene. So cheers to you for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's great to be able to chat, and I'll get this out of the way early because I'm going to touch on it probably a little bit later, but and when I started this podcast back in 2019, I was always on this sort of wave of where are the jazz conversations? You know what I mean? And so it's always been baked in. Either I'm reaching out to folks that I know who are musicians, or even last year, for April Jazz Appreciation Month, I was in New Orleans, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and DC interviewing folks who are musicians, jazz champions. So it's always been. So I'm super happy to be able to have the two of you on.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Look, putting Baltimore on in that map is part of our mission, right? Is to keep Baltimore in the jazz icons of cities that you have to talk about, right? When you talk about it. And look, we're not always top of people's mind, but it's something we're working on trying to change.
Absolutely. So to sort of set the stage, let's go back a little bit. Again, thank you both for being here. And to start things off, I'd love it for each of you to introduce yourselves, because you both have distinct backgrounds outside of Sonic Lifeline that come together. So if you will, Ed, could you start, and then we'll go down to Nick?
Sure. I've been in live entertainment, live production for almost 30 years now. Started my career in the theater as a stage manager, doing the New York route of Broadway and off Broadway, and that transitioned into some film and television opportunities, and ultimately into the live event production space, mainly on the corporate side of things. But I worked for a lot of Fortune 100 companies doing their conventions or live shows that incorporate staging and concerts and et cetera, et cetera. So it's very fulfilling from a production standpoint, career path, and I've been very fortunate it's been a good run for me. And I think, not to jump ahead, but I think the last 4 years disrupted a lot of people, right? And we put all. I think if you don't come away from our recent times change in some way, you've missed some opportunity. So for me, taking all that experience of my professional career and putting it into the Sonic Lifeline, which we created during that time, has really opened up a completely new chapter for me personally and professionally. I wish I could be doing this all the time, full time, every day.
Thank you. Nick?
Yeah, so I'm like a full-time self-taught photographer that used to be a musician. So I kind of started out on the musician side of things. So I really kind of emphasize, and I really can kind of, I really know where the musicians are coming from, and the amount of time and talent and skill it takes to get to the level that they're at.
Sure.
And that kind of translates over into my photography too. But yeah, so I used to play guitar and bass, and I used to produce a lot of music. I would basically play all the instruments myself and record it at my house, and just really fell in love with that process. And then I transitioned at some point in my life. That's a whole nother story, where I went fully into photography, but with music as kind of a cornerstone of what I was documenting. Like the local music scene was like my muses when I really was exploring and doing the most meaningful photography work. So the fact that I could bring that kind of angle and where it meets the skills that my uncle has, to be able to come full circle and bring them into this kind of world that we've kind of been building over the past few years is really fulfilling. So,
yeah, Rob, did we mention that we're related? Or did you mention that? I missed it.
Oh, no. Yeah. So talk about that a little bit, because that's another piece of it where when you're working together, when you're collaborating, you're bringing those skill sets, but it's even more interesting and maybe for some people more challenging when it's like, and we're related. Like, they say, yeah, are you working with your wife? I'm like, ooh, well, you working with your brother? Ooh.
It's interesting. This was like a natural progression. I'm a few years older than Nick. I mean, Nick, but Nick is my nephew on my wife's side of the family, and I think I like Nick. We always connected from when we first met, but which may have been at your high school graduation. I don't remember exactly, but
jamming in your studio, playing music together.
That right.
Was a special bond. So
yeah, absolutely. But always. As being I'm a creative person and working in the production field, always, watching Nick's professional career take shape, over the recent years has been, really phenomenal to watch and trying to support it however I was able to. I probably, my career path there was no straight line, right? As you enter the theater and the arts. And I think that was a big takeaway for me. It's like just one door opens and you go through it and see where that leads. And I think I've always tried to, and working with anyone, especially family or young people in general, try to encourage, like, just, be open to opportunities that and people that inspire you or that are around you that you want to learn from and be around. So I was able to watch Nick do that with his music and then his photography. So seeing that take off has been an amazing pleasure. But when this came about, we both love getting out in the woods. We both camp.
Okay.
Well, I like to drive in the woods. Nick actually likes to hike in the woods. He's, again, a bit younger than I am. But when this opportunity came up during those pandemic years, when for many people, like I mentioned, many people found ourselves at a transitional moment, a moment of crisis for some, right, for many. But we enjoyed getting out into the wilderness as much as possible during that time, and I think, Nick, you were doing a lot of live streams from small locations for musicians, or all the musician friends that we have who couldn't perform anymore. I have a lot of people, right, were streaming from their homes, home studios, porch shows, right? And Nick was involved with that and kind of invited me in because I've all of a sudden had a lot of time on my hands, to come partake in that and help produce these live streams, kind of how it started. And we were fortunate in that time that one of the owners at this establishment called Little Havana, which is in Baltimore around the Harbor, is a dear friend of mine, a friend and neighbor from here in Baltimore. And right around that, as these worlds converged, he was like, we have this room that we built out right at the beginning of the COVID years that's empty. Gee, what can we do with it? And it was like, I think, walking in that room and feeling the vibe and hearing the acoustics, going, wow, this room was really meant for kind of one thing. So sitting around a campfire with Nick going, hey, what if we did this at this space? And Nick's like, oh, well, I got the musicians, you've got the, it's like, it was really that kind of approach of collaboration, right? It sort of came together.
Yeah, and it kind of started on such a high note. Because I think because I was already immersed in the scene, we have this brand new thing that no one's heard of that we're just starting to create. Yeah. But I had a little bit of like kind of street cred, just because people had seen me around, like during the pandemic times and everything was shut down, trying to document the music and like kind of set up these kind of guerrilla type shows and kind of live streams. So our first show was like a freak blizzard in like April, and we still sold it out with Herb Scott and like an incredible lineup. So to have that, to start on such a high note was also awesome too. It's like, we didn't know exactly what was going to happen going into it, and it was just a unbelievable feeling to walk into that room and to see all the people there and to feel like, okay, this is it. This is the first step. This was like the first turning of the wheel.
But that's when things were opening back up and we were allowed to do live shows again. Because before that,
yeah.
you were doing the record shop live streams with some incredible musicians.
Yeah, I don't know what I was doing. I like to credit myself with, there'll never be a time again in history where you could get musicians of that caliber to come on a Friday night and play for like $20 of store credit for like cassette tapes and vinyl records. Like literally everything was shut down, and like there was no clubs to play at all. And then, the owner of the record shop nonchalantly asked me one day, he's like, what if we produce shows here? He's like, I got a grant, just write down on a piece of paper the gear we need. And then everything showed up. He's like, all right, you better teach yourself how to use a mixing board and whatever. And I expect bands every week. And then I think we did like 15 shows, but it was like pre-Columbian music from the Andes, from like Bolivia and Peru, and then go-go, and then jazz, and then like neo soul. So like I always was trying to kind of represent the different communities in the DC music scene. So that's kind of how I kind of got addicted to what we're doing now, because I was coming in there as a photographer, and now I have to wear all these hats. But then like I really respected the what goes into making a successful production feel a certain way and sound a certain way, and these intangible things that when you come in the room, they just kind of digest them outside of the sounds that you're hearing. It's a whole experience that you're trying to craft, and that's what I really got an appreciation for when I like dove headfirst into it. If that makes sense.
It does, and I want for the because I didn't mention it, because I want to go for the benefit, and we'll go into this next question for the benefit of the listeners. What we're talking about here, we're talking about the Hemingway Room. That's the other thing. Like we touched on like Little Havana. We touched on sort of some of the early performances, sort of that period of having these streams in what becomes now, which is in its second year, right? Sort of the Hemingway Room. And I'll comment on this one thing that I thought is really interesting, that 2020, period on forward, everyone got really ingenious, a lot of ingenuity, figuring things out. Like, I'm learning how to use different mixers myself to do what I'm doing at home. And, this podcast really kind of took off in that time frame as well. Like, I talk about it, in 5 years. So we're talking 2019 when this podcast started. My 800th episode as we're recording this comes out tomorrow. And
wow, congrats on that.
Congratulations. Yeah, amazing.
And a lot of that is from the home studio, figuring it out because we're unable to, be in person. And, it's something about them being able to take some of those ideas out of necessity. I heard sort of those porch concerts. I still see those. I think those are really cool, and really it's a unique and intimate way of doing it, and seeing people use sort of parameters and like these barriers. Like, let's say you have the biggest arena, you can, kind of do certain things. But if it's like, I got a porch, I'm going to get this double bass in here, I'm going to get this mixer and these speakers, all of this in there. So it's kind of creative problem solving with the parameters that are there, and being able to take that once we're able to be back in the same space with each other. It's beautiful. And one of the other things I heard before moving into this next question is sort of where that collaboration works, with the two of you, and sort of both having these similar interests, and seeing like having the, what I heard from Nick, having the background as a musician, and having sort of being in the scene, and kind of doing storytelling, but through this understanding of artists, and being able to leverage sort of that background. And for Ed, your background in live production, live event production, those things coming together, being like equally yoked. And it's like, I'm going to leverage my skill set, leverage yours, and see where we meet. You know, it's Reese's, it's peanut butter and chocolate.
Well, the name, even, the calling it the Sonic Lifeline, even in the beginning, I was like, I think it's hard to, we think back now, it's just such recent history, but like to put yourself in the mindset of what it was like back in those years of uncertainty for many people, right? Or just, and so it really was a lifeline for musicians, for ourselves, the name itself is very meaningful to me personally. I think it was meant to really give an opportunity for artists to be able to play and perform and allow, Nick and I wanted to create those spaces and those opportunities. That was a lifeline. I don't know what else I would be doing. It would literally saved me during that period, mentally in many ways. So I wanted to get that across. I think that was an important part. And I think coming out of that was, I looked around the city. I live here in Baltimore, and Nick's down in DC, right? And I had been traveling. I was on the road a lot before that. My career had me out of town, and so now I'm in town looking at my kids who are going to school here, and the community I live in, and realizing I didn't do enough, wasn't involved enough in our city or where I lived, in a city that needs all of us to be involved if you live here. I think, and I didn't know. I didn't know where I could I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to lend my skills or where to jump in. I only knew how to do shows, how to put on shows. And I felt in some way that the city, I needed this, the city needed this, the musicians needed this. And it was the only way I knew to help, to really get involved and say, let's get people in a room together. And I said this the other night at the show. I try and say this at every show. Like, I think it's really by some design, trying to get people from different parts of the city in a room together to hear a really positive sound coming from our city. Yeah. Not just this sounds and stories I heard as I traveled the world, and people said, "Oh, you live in Baltimore? Oh, well, here's what we know of Baltimore, right?" It's like, oh, well, so I felt a duty. I feel a duty to try and to promote from within, from this community we have and the musicians and the artists we have. That's a big piece of what we do. And even to this, like, Nick and I love talk. It's great. Thank you for letting us talk about it, but we try and make that story and the musicians and the experience around that that should be under the spotlight, not necessarily Nick and I. We're behind the scenes, hopefully making it happen.
That's a good point, and thank you for that, because it's baked into what I'm doing here. I'm based in Baltimore as well. I spend time in Philly, spend time in DC. I was actually just in DC the other day, and I was like, this is moving around too much. But it's one of those things where when I go to a different city, I was recently in Columbus to do some comic thing, right? Because I'm talking to so many different people, different artists, different creative folks, different people and from different communities. And I felt, I had to slag off the, Browns and in Cleveland and all of that stuff, because that's where I was at in Columbus. And I think it was a Saturday, and I was like, oh yeah, you guys got football, big football town, and I had to throw my Ravens dig in. But sort of I used it as an opportunity to dispel some of that, anti-Baltimore sentiment, or that ill-informed Baltimore sentiment, and just under the guise that we have a lot of creativity there, which is always left out of the conversation, a lot of different scenes. And, I know this is a question that's going to come up, I might as well get to it now, that, as I was talking about traveling, there's Baltimore, there's DC, there's Philly. And, as I was sharing before we got started, that, and a little bit when we were talking earlier, that, I've done these interviews through this sort of lens of arts, culture, community, but specifically in those cities with, jazz, with music. And there's sort of this pipeline, right? This sort of this interactive thing that's there. And cities, in my opinion, have a lot of similarities. They're unique, but they have a lot of similarities. So from your perspectives, what does that look like as far as the where the cities maybe overlap through sort of this lens of jazz and this lens of performing arts overall? Where do the cities sort of overlap?
I'm really glad you brought that up. And look, and I'm not an authority on this, so I can only speak from my hands-on experience of recent and what I've learned from so many incredible musicians. You've mentioned some of them, Lionel Lyles, who was on your show, Brandon Woody, Clarence Ward, right? I've learned so much from speaking with the artists here. I feel a real, and I know one of your questions is what's next for Sonic Lifeline. So I'm going to, you're hitting on two topics, because I do, the pipeline you talked about, which was thriving in a big piece of jazz history, music history here on the East Coast, Baltimore sound, Philly sound, New York sound, right? DC sound. I'm going to get there in a moment. I'm going to thread this together, Rob, in a way.
Good.
As we want to expand the artists that we have here and say, oh, let's do a show. I'm originally from New Jersey, right? Let's do a show. I want to bring musicians up there and kind of spread the sound of what we're doing here. One of the biggest challenges becomes the costs, the expense of putting on a fully produced show in another city and moving the musicians. By the time they put the expense of hotel or transportation, right? They should be getting paid many times what they're getting paid for these performances. So to your point, it's how do we regenerate this pipeline that musicians can move among the cities at minimal expense to allow them to be able to play at venues like the Hemingway Room or Smalls in New York or Blues Alley and all the just kind of link us all together and recreate an easy way for them to move through the system and allow us as producers, promoters to invite musicians from those sister cities, right? So it's a really, I don't have an answer to it. I have a couple ideas which we're in the works of further developing that maybe on the next podcast we can talk about.
Absolutely.
But it's a very big, it's constantly on our mind because we really want to take the Baltimore sound outside and bring it on the road, as well as have the Philly sound come visit us. The last weekend, in our Hemingway Room lineup, we try and have a weekend that is musicians coming to Baltimore to give them the welcoming experience of our city. And we had some incredible musicians coming up down from New York or actually BLO came from a couple different places. Anyway, that's
South Carolina. South Carolina, New York. So
I digress, Rob. I'm sorry, but that's a really wonderful topic that that is. And I love that you've been to those cities and interviewed the musicians in those cities, because I think there's probably some more collaboration for you and I to talk about linking all this together.
Absolutely. And, and Nick, you were touching on BLO a little bit. So talk a bit about that, like sort of bringing that together and more so even the curation and the scheduling of these shows. And one, I'll say I had a great time. I was able to go to the Friday show, the first show.
Oh, awesome.
And I great time. I enjoyed my old fashioned in the back. I was writing copious notes. I had a great time. Music was amazing. I felt like I was being whisked off into like this exclusive room. I was like, am I underdressed? What am I doing? And the fog machine was a really good touch as well. And it just felt like, I know I'm in Baltimore, right? And, I'm definitely a big Baltimore advocate, but also I felt like I was being transferred to like just a different place, and the music was a part of it. It was just such a really cool experience, and I raved about it over the weekend. So in building out sort of what that experience looks like and what you're aiming for, what comes to mind, and what's the curation process of like, these are the folks I know. These are the folks that I can kind of get. Talk a bit about that. Yeah.
So, and I've got to excuse me, another fire engine is coming down the street. There's like so many different ways that I could, go with the series with who I book. So it's kind of like, I'll make a huge list and I'll sit down and I'll kind of map out in my head. I'm like, all right, if we went in this direction, then what would the next show be? And then what would the next weekend be? And then we kind of look at it now as like seasons. So we're trying to map out like, what is the fall season going to be? And then I think we try to go for an artist every season that's like someone that's from out of town, like Ed was talking about, that we could bring down here. And I booked, trying to get Luke Stewart to come down because he's kind of like a friend of mine I've had for years, really heavy in the avant-garde scene, like always traveling to Europe and always traveling all over the place. And like, it's like him and BLO would just be such a crazy combo. Like, I don't think anyone's done that here. So I was like, that was kind of the reasoning behind that whole weekend, the Friday, Saturday. It's almost like the BLO show and the Luke show. I kind of thought of them as like a package of like, two completely different shows that will complement each other, that are a little bit outside of what some of our other shows have sounded like in the past. Like, we've never had a band like BLO or like Luke Stewart in our series. So it was like completely new experience all the way around. And the fact that they were both available on those dates, I'm like, this has gotta happen. This has gotta be on the calendar. So I don't know if that answers it, but it's kind of like when I curate, there's so many aspects of jazz. There's the neo soul, the Latin jazz, there's the more avant-garde stuff, there's the straight ahead, there's even like Ethiopian and like Brazilian jazz. So it's like, I never want someone to come and feel like they had the same exact experience or I've seen the same exact band. So I try to add the different flavors and like the different kind of seasonings to it, so that it's not just one thing every time, all the time,
Yeah.
So it all falls under the umbrella of jazz. That's such a broad kind of umbrella, especially in this area with all the different communities that are playing that music. So,
yeah, Rob, that ties into, I think, also if you join us again at a show, you'll see that even that room, the Hemingway room specifically, it's the setup of that, the design of that room is very bespoke to that audience, right? Stage goes away, but every time we bring it in, it's reconfigured to go, what works well for that performance, right? The shape of the stage, the way we kind of configure it, the way Nick lights it, right? So there's definitely a lot of thought into that whole experience that fits the audience, and the fact that if you go in that room the next day and there's nothing in that room, and you go, wasn't there something here last night? Nope, it's all gone.
Or it's like a baby shower, or like a right. It could be anything not related to jazz. So
probably worth mentioning, BLO is Brock Lenzetti Ogawa of Snarky Puppy, incredible, the violinist, guitarist, and percussionist. And this was the second time we had the pleasure of working with them, and I hope there's many more opportunities with them, because it's a really incredible sound and wonderful people to work with.
Yeah, they were great, and just going into something, and I think even as far as sort of the talk, the sort of coverage at the beginning, and sort of the coverage between sets, this notion is this concept and this belief and goal of having folks in the same room, like. That's the thing that I kept thinking of. And I try to go and doing events, like doing live, because I thought about the room for a podcast as another one of those things that the room can be configured for. But thinking about like movie nights and different events and getting into the production side of things, it's kind of a hard pull to get folks to come out. But once you have them coming out, and then it's just like a really, really good time. And as I said, I raved about it when I was down there in DC. I was in Anacostia the next morning, and, I was talking with my partner. I was like, yo, we got to do family jazz night. We're going to go here. We're going to go to the Hemingway Room. We're not going to have cigars, but we could. It's going to be great. And, and really just raving about it. And, for me, and I think for a lot of folks, we have those sort of economic things. We have those sort of time things. It's easier not to do something than to do something. So when one does something, it's just like, if it's good and it hits, it's like, I want to come back. And I want to come to the next one, and I want to see what else is planned. And that's what I was thinking through when I was going through, like, coming up with these questions. And one of the other things that I think stuck out when doing some of the preparation and the research that sticks out, and I think it's baked into how the two of you build out sort of these shows, but also even the curation and all of really finding artists that are, as Nick was touching on, that hit different parts of this sort of full spectrum, this umbrella of jazz, but also that you can let cook, that you can let kind of do their thing. Like, it's that sort of trust there. It's like, you're going to show up, because look, when I was talking about booking some musicians at one point, I got like 15 interviews. It was supposed to be 25. There's a lot of no-shows. I'm not going to name any names. So, finding sort of the right mix and the right people who just crush it. That's another thing that I thought. You have any comments or any insights on that?
We look at we're not a venue. I think that's number one. Like, we don't want to be, we're not just a venue. The artists that we develop relationships with, or any that we work with, we want to be viewed as a co-producer of that experience that evening. Every show we do is multi-tracked. So beyond the show, we spend time, we make sure that the artist walks away with a really nice mix of that show that they can do with, hopefully put it out there. We want the library to live on afterwards as we develop the library and work with artists in the future on what they want to do with that library. So a lot of thought into how that evening looks. So, and I think that is something as we worked more and more to people, it's not just a show, right? We're not, and I've said this before, but we're not jazz brunch, right? You can go to jazz brunch at many places, and you should. And the more venues that offer, that pay musicians to play, there should be, because I love it, right? But we're a little different, and we go into other venues to do this. Now we have the good fortune of the Hemingway Room being our kind of home base, and the good fortune of our friends at Little Havana offering that to us. We curate a jam session every Tuesday night in DC at a place called Whitlow's that Joe Palmer hosts. Incredible Joe Palmer on, and we try and create a similar vibe of an artist-centric experience where, and again, this you're talking to Nick and I, so it's a lot about us tonight, but I think it's really trying to create that stage and give them that stage, exactly like you said, where they can cook, right? and as an audience, I'm going to go back when I moved to Baltimore. It's been almost 17 years now. There was a club called Club 347. It was near Mercy Hospital, and it was it's a parking lot now, I have to say. Many of the people in the jazz community around here will know 347. It was a place where a lot of people, I hear now, paid their dues there. And I was just an audience member. Would go there and walked away feeling like I had just left, Madison Square Garden, right? The musicians that came there, and the experience that I had, and the music I heard, and the emotion they cooked on stage the entire time, and that always stuck with me all these years. So now we have the opportunity to try and recreate a little bit of that magic that somehow happened on those nights of those jam sessions. That's very important. I think it happened because you give the space to the musicians to feel at home, to be at home, to not think about you're here to entertain an audience. Okay, yes, we love having an audience. It helps make all this possible, but it really is creating a space for musicians to give us the opportunity to peer behind that curtain and experience something that we don't always get to see. If we can do that, we've, I think, done our job. So that's kind of to me is creating that place where people can come together and just, wow, how did that happen? That's what we're trying to create.
That's great.
And it's not like there's certain venues that these guys play at, and they got to play standards, or they got to play tunes, or there's like a certain repertoire that they're kind of caged in. Here, I mean, you can play a song for 30 minutes. You can play a song for 20 minutes. It could be completely spontaneous. It could be, there's no pressure to play anything besides what you want to play. So it's like, it gives them the ultimate freedom to play without the limitations of having to stay within a certain box. Yeah. So they can create whatever box they want to when they're in the room.
That's good. That's a really good point. And before I move into this sort of last question, and I got some rapid fire questions for the two of you, but yeah, that's a really good point. Like when I think those best situations, like I was sharing a bit of sort of my experience when I interviewed Lionel. Lyle's, it was sort of a weekend of doing Artscape and doing a bunch of interviews. And I'm like, this is something that I haven't really done. And there were some nerves, and this is a new sort of setup. And, I have this to protect me from, my flubs or what have you. But doing it in person and doing it right after the performance, it's just a whole different setup. And, the folks that booked me, from BOPA, it wasn't, one of those things of we need you to ask these specific questions in this way and so on. It was just like, hey, we trust you. We know what you're doing. Who did you book? Pretty much let me do my own thing, sort of empowering the artist in this instance. So I have the performer in this instance to do their thing. And I felt like that was a really enriching moment for me to do something, that I had some nerves about, some trepidation around. And really being able to take it to that next stage, I felt empowered, I guess is the point I'm getting at. And I would imagine sort of the way that you're describing this approach with Hemingway Room and the artists that are involved, it's just like, hey, we know what you're doing. Do your thing.
Rob, the name of your podcast is the truth
in this art. Yes.
You cannot get to the truth in art unless you, I think, have the freedom to find that truth. And I think that's kind of what you've created in your podcast and what we're trying to create here.
That's a really good point. Thank you. So I want to move into this last question. And, we were teasing this a little bit, and this is probably sort of a to be continued, but I at least want to get a sense. So this is, sort of as we're recording this, this is towards the ending of this year. Is it the end of year 2? Is it sort of continuation of year 2? And sort of the second part of that question, what were the key learnings, I guess, from year 1 to year 2, as far as putting on these shows and really just growing it?
Yeah, wow. This is, I think, like Nick mentioned earlier, being able to booking it thinking of it as a season was a learning because look, as generous as Little Havana is, and coordinating with them to take over that room on fixed dates is something I have to work hard with them, because if it's spring and wedding season, and like Nick mentioned, a wedding party comes in and wants to book that room, guess what? There's no jazz that night, right? It's so, right. And look, they're extremely supportive of it, and so one thing we learned over the years that trying to get a consistent audience, because the other thing, this is completely self-produced between Nick and I as a Sonic Lifeline. We operate this is not a pay to play for the artist. This is not how many people you can bring. This is we operate like we're the Kennedy Center, but we're not. But so unfortunately, if there's 5 people in the audience, that's on us. That's not on the artist, right? So building a consistent audience has been a bit of a challenge, and part of that may have been we didn't have consistent dates. So this fall was the first time we were able to say every third Friday and Saturday we're going to do a show.
Yeah, and
I say that, and with some sadness that in November we've had to change the dates. It was supposed to be November 15th, 16th. We've had to change the date to November 23rd for the next show. And that is simply out of Nick and I in our professional careers, and a work opportunity came up for me. And I unfortunately not, have to go and travel and we had to change.
An offer you couldn't refuse.
It was an offer I couldn't refuse. So we're not at that level yet, Rob, where we can turn down other work, but we'll get there. We'll get there eventually. But so I think learnings have been consistent, that the audience, the community would like more consistency as when is this happening? How do we find it? Yeah. The artist, I think we could be booking shows more than just twice, 2 weekends a month. We would love to. There's so many incredible musicians out there we want to continue to work with. So that's a big piece of it as well. I think of a learning, right? Just trying to do more. Right?
Yeah.
And then, for me, I feel like, I'm always going to jazz clubs in DC and always going to new spaces. And I'm kind of on like reconnaissance missions in a way where I see the things that I really love and enjoy about these spaces, but then also maybe things that could be improved in certain ways, and how I can take what I'm learning from all these spaces that exist around us and use those lessons and experiencing these shows to better what we're doing here, and just take back little pieces of all those things I've been experiencing over the past 2 years. Because I'm kind of in a position where, I have my business, but when I'm out working, I'm seeing music. Like I'm in the scene as deep as I can possibly be. So that kind of keeps my ear to the streets a little bit to see what's trending, what's happening, and where things are going in this area. So,
Rob, maybe something again, a future collaboration, something for us to talk about. Is it would be interesting because we're not, I'm sure we're not the only ones that think like this, right? About our approach to the way we're doing this. I would love to build a coalition amongst like-minded promoters, producers, and club owners throughout up and down the East Coast and other cities, right? Yeah. And sort of continue this discussion about how do we together create more opportunities to move musicians up and down the East Coast and share these sounds and rebuild that pipeline that once existed. Something. We'd love to continue that conversation with you and see if we can get some others involved in that conversation.
I think that'd be good. I think it's a really good thing, a good approach, because I think sort of and I definitely relate as far as the seasons. I relate as far as being consistent, figuring out ways to have folks come out. Like, this is a volume thing. I'm always working. I'm always putting out some stuff. But, I started thinking of things very much through seasons. And, I'm planning out sort of my next season. And it's going to be very tight, very consistent. And, literally just one per week. A new thing is popping up versus, man, you might get 3 this week. You might get 5 next week. I do a lot. And it's, kind of bringing that down a bit, which is not really my choice, but it's like, this is sort of a thing that makes sense to be able to extend and expand and do other things that are of interest to move the needle and to stretch sort of the boundaries of what I'm doing creatively. And yeah, I think, sort of the learning from one stage to the next is really important, and definitely the seasons are a piece, and how one defines it and how one connects, because this is, I always joke about it, but it's a lot of truth in it, that this is a collaborative art project. Like when I have folks on, there are some folks who they got nothing, and I'm like, oof, this is gonna be pulling teeth. And there are other folks who talk more than me, and it makes it like, am I even on this podcast? So it's sort of one of those things, and it's just trying to like figure it out and find it. But the point is, and I'll kind of close out on this, it's about those those reps. You're able to get those reps, and you learn from each one of those reps. And I love what you were saying there, Nick, about kind of being on those reconnaissance missions. When I go into other cities, I'm like, all right, how can I steal this and bring it back to Baltimore? How can I make it? And yeah, so that's really great. And I'm really happy of the work that the two of you are doing, and sort of the mission, and continued success. This is great stuff. And so with that, I want to move into two rapid fire questions. In these 5 moments that we have here. Now, I give you this preface. You don't want to overthink these. It's kind of like that saying. It's like, I said what I said, All right. Hey guys, Rob Lee here, chiming in the middle of the podcast, and we'll be right back to that in a moment. But I wanted to remind you that if you're following me on Instagram, and I hope you are, The Truth in This Art, make sure that you explore the links, the link in bio. I know that people always talk about follow me, link in bio, and all of that, but there's some valuable stuff in there, such as a survey for my newsletter. You've probably received the newsletter, and if not, definitely sign up for it. There's some interesting stuff there. We have profiles on certain guests. We have sort of curated episodes, because we're around 800 right now, and it's a lot to go through, and all of them won't be available on every platform all the time. So being able to revisit and go back there to check out those episodes is important. So definitely check out the survey. Let us know what you think of the newsletter and what you would like to have included in there, and continue to make this podcast yours as well as mine's. And yeah, back to the podcast, rapid fire. When spirits are down, right? Like, we all have those moments of like, man, I didn't book that person, or, for me, that podcast didn't go well. Without fail, what boosts your spirits? Is it a song? Is it cat videos? Is it a good meal? What brings up your spirits when you're down, especially when it's something creative?
For me, it's nature. Like if I have the opportunity, it's running on the trails. I do crazy 40, 50-mile bike rides. I go sit by the river. I go out in the mountains. So for me, that's how I recharge from like an extremely stimulating week of sometimes gig after gig, and then going and producing shows in Baltimore, which I have an amazing time doing. But then when I get the first free chance I gotta be out in nature a little bit, and then I'm all good.
I hear you.
I sit down at the piano and go and play and work on a very personal music space. So I'm a musician as well, but I put that, I don't put myself at the top of the list of musicians. So it's for me, it's sitting at the piano.
Yeah, it's cat videos for me. No. It's like, man, what is that feline doing? That's great. That's great. And having sort of those opportunities to recharge, for me, really it is stepping away, like really being able to reset and to enjoy things without having some other intent with it. Like, almost last second, like obviously, I went to the show this past Friday, the BLO show this past Friday, and I was going to have my girl come. It was always like her coming. And it was one of those things where I was like, I'm working too. So I was like, let me do this. Let me do my work piece, because it's like, I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to have that. I'm able to split minds, but it's like adding the third layer to split there. So I was like, all right, cool. Let me get my work piece done. And once I have that settled, because I know we have this conversation coming up, then we're good. And I was like, we're absolutely going to the next show.
Next show. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what it is. That's what it is. It's like, when I go to a movie, I do a movie review podcast. It's like, am I watching this for fun? Or am I watching this for research? I have to delineate sometimes.
The next show you're going to come sit right next to me at that bar stool down front. It's the most incredible experience. It's like, you're right. I can't tell you what joy it gives me to just, you put all the effort, work to make it happen, then you sit there and you write. It takes over in a way I can't describe.
That's great. I'll take that invitation. So I like this next one. This one I was really happy about, and this would be a nice one to close out on. I find that some of the best jazz musicians, right, they have really great nicknames and stage names. So have either of you ever used an alias? And if so, what was said alias?
Like for in the music world, or in our personal lives? Because I've,
Nick's got many.
I don't know if you ever heard of Muddy Waters.
Yeah.
I grew up in PG County, and in certain parts of Hyattsville, I'm known as Dookie Waters.
I like it.
But basically, I had band practice in the basement of this house. It was like this corner house, huge yard, $350 a rent a month for this massive basement space.
Yeah.
The sewage pipe, something happened, and it all overflowed in the basement. So then the band came back over for practice the next week. They're like, it smells like some Dookie Waters down here. And then they started calling me that. So then I became Dookie Waters. So
that's good.
And I ran with that for a while. House is still there. If anyone is in West Hyattsville, it's on Manorwood Drive and Jamestown Road. The corner house is the Dookie Waters house.
Oh, man.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I love it. Ed, you got anything?
I don't have many aliases. Although now, because I'm Nick's uncle, I get a lot of people saying, "Oh, you're Uncle Ed. You're Uncle Ed." So I think I somehow become Uncle Ed.
Here's why that happens. Because the musicians will ask me, "What's Ed's phone number?" and I'll share my contact, and I have him stored as Uncle Ed. So then they save him as Uncle Ed. So all the musicians have him stored as Uncle Ed in their phone. So
That's good.
so he is Uncle Ed.
There you go.
That's good. That's good. I don't have any aliases that I'm aware of. So I don't know what people call me outside of this podcast, but I always do this running bit where I'm always on my P's and Q's of where I'm at, because definitely, Ed, you saw me in person, rather tall, right? And it's one of those things where I'm like, all right, I need to buy my P's and Q's. I can't hide. I can't just be in the cut, right? So it's like I can almost see it. Truth in This Art, cutting up. They just call me the name of the podcast instead of my name. It's just like,
oh, that's where you get recognized as. Oh, the Truth in the Art is here.
Yeah, that's just Truth in This Art. Here. It's like, can I be Rob for a second? Nah, Truth in This Art.
It's a strong nickname, though. You know,
it works.
Yeah.
So that's kind of it for the podcast in terms of the conversation. So there's two things I want to do as we close out here. One,
Sure.
I want to thank both of you for coming on and spending some time with me. This has been a lot of fun. It's been great to learn more about Sonic Lifeline, your individual insights as well. And two, I want to invite and encourage both of you to share anything in the final moment, social media, website, stuff like that, where the folks can. This is sort of the shameless plug portion of the podcast. So if you will, the floor is yours.
Well, the Sonic Lifeline, .com for the web, or the Sonic Lifeline on Instagram. The next show in the Hemingway Room will be November 23rd. The incredible Phil Thomas as musical director, local Baltimore musician and musical director. He did a show with us last year that was all around the music of Donny Hathaway and built an entire cast. It was called Dear Donny, and we're doing something similar. This on this show, songs that speak, and there'll be a lot of vocal songs, a lot of songs that kind of in the neo soul world, a lot of songs that kind of speak spiritually or have meaning to it. So, and Phil Thomas leading as musical director on November 23rd, the Hemingway Room. You can find us at the Sonic Lifeline.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Ed Baldi and Nick Moreland from Sonic Lifeline for sharing a bit on the Hemingway Room. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.